The stars looked cold and distant through the bridge windows of the indomitable Will. Captain sat in his command chair, watching the endless darkness of space. His ship was old, nearly 30 years in service, and everyone knew it. The paint was chipped, the engines made strange noises, and half the crew were young recruits fresh from training. Fleet Command had sent them to the outer edges of human space, far from anything important. They were the forgotten ones. Was 52 years old with hair and tired eyes. He had been in the military for 3 decades, fighting in battles that most people never heard about. His uniform was worn but clean, and his hands were steady on the armrests of his chair. He knew what it meant to be stationed this far out. They were bait, nothing more. If the enemy came, they would die alone while buying time for the real fleet to prepare. Commander stood beside him, studying the tactical display. She was younger, only 35, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had served under for 7 years and trusted him completely. The rest of the bridge crew worked quietly at their stations. Ensign, barely 23 years old, monitored communications. Her hands sometimes shook when she thought no one was watching. This was her first deep space assignment. Down in engineering, Lieutenant was arguing with his equipment again. The fusion core was acting up as usual, was a genius with machines, but even he could not make their aging ship perform like a new one. He wiped sweat from his forehead and adjusted another power coupling. The ship groaned in response, but kept running. In the medical bay, Dr. Jin checked her supplies for the 100th time. She knew what was coming. Everyone did. The reports from other sectors were clear. The Dominion was advancing, crushing human colonies one by one. Their fleet was massive, their weapons powerful, and they showed no mercy. It was only a matter of time before they came here. Sergeant Sung drilled his Marines in the cargo bay. 22 men and women, most of them kids, practiced combat formations and weapons handling. Sung was built like a bear, with scars on his face from a dozen battles. He shouted orders and corrected mistakes, preparing them for a fight he knew they might not survive. But he would make sure they were ready anyway. The alarm went off at 3:47 hours. Ensign's voice cracked as she reported, "Captain, we have multiple hyperspace signatures. They're everywhere." Leaned forward, his heart steady despite what he was seeing. The tactical display lit up with red icons. Dozens of them. Then hundreds. Enemy ships were appearing all around them, forming a perfect sphere with the indomitable Will at the center. "Count?" asked, her voice calm. 300 ships, Commander replied. "All their weapons are charging." The bridge fell silent. 300 ships. The indomitable Will was alone, with only 247 crew members against an entire fleet. It was not a battle. It was an execution. A transmission came through. The flickered to life, showing a commander. The alien was tall and covered in scales, with 4 arms and eyes that glowed red. It spoke through a translator, its voice harsh and mechanical. "Human vessel, I am Overlord. You are surrounded and outnumbered. Power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. You have 1 minute to comply or we will destroy you." Looked at the alien for a long moment. Then he reached forward and muted the transmission without responding. Around the bridge, his crew stared at him in shock. "Captain?" asked quietly. Stood up and walked to looking at the sea of enemy ships surrounding them. He could see their weapons charging, their shields glowing. They were so confident, so certain of their victory. That was their first mistake. He turned to his crew. Young faces looked back at him, scared but waiting for orders. These were his people. Some of them would die today, maybe all of them, but they would die doing their duty. "All hands, this is the captain," he said, his voice carrying through the ship's communication system. "I will not lie to you. We are surrounded by 300 enemy warships. Fleet Command cannot help us. We are alone. The enemy expects us to surrender or run." He paused, letting that sink in. In engineering, stopped working and listened. In medical, Jin closed her eyes. In the cargo bay, Sung and his Marines stood at attention. But we are not going to do either of those things, continued. We are going to fight. We are going to make them regret coming here. We are going to show them what happens when you corner a human crew and expect them to just give up. They think they have us trapped, but they have made a critical mistake. They have trapped themselves in here with us. On the bridge smiled. It was a cold, dangerous smile. She understood what was doing. If they were going to die, they would take as many enemies with them as possible. Battle stations, ordered. Charge all weapons. Route maximum power to forward shields. Helm, plot a course directly through their formation. Captain, they're hailing us again, reported. Ignore it, said. He sat back down in his chair and gripped the armrests. They want to talk. We're going to give them something else to think about. The indomitable Will's engines roared to life. Old and battered as she was, the ship still had fight in her. Weapon systems powered up. Shield generators hummed. Throughout the ship, 247 souls prepared for battle. The fleet hung in space, waiting. They expected the human ship to try to escape or to shut down and surrender. They did not expect what came next. Helm, execute, commanded. The indomitable Will accelerated forward at maximum speed, driving straight toward the nearest group of enemy ships. Alarms blared as the fleet scrambled to respond. They were so used to enemies who ran or surrendered that they had no plan for one that attacked. All weapons fire at will, ordered. The old destroyer opened fire, and the battle began. The indomitable Will shook as enemy fire hammered against its shields. Red lights flashed across the bridge, and the smell of burning circuits filled the air. Captain gripped his chair as the ship rolled hard to starboard, dodging a barrage of plasma fire that would have destroyed them instantly. Forward shields at 60%, called out, her fingers dancing across her console. Multiple enemy ships moving to intercept. Watched the tactical display with cold calculation. The ships were moving exactly as he expected. They fought with overwhelming numbers, using simple formations that crushed any enemy through pure force. It had worked for them across 100 worlds, but that predictability was their weakness. Helm, Vector 270, increase speed to maximum, ordered. Take us toward that asteroid field. The helmsman hesitated for just a second. Sir, if we go into the asteroids, they'll box us in. Do it, said firmly. The ship changed course, racing toward a dense field of spinning rocks and debris. Behind them, 50 warships gave chase, confident that they had the human vessel running scared. Exactly what wanted them to think. In engineering, Lieutenant was performing miracles. He had bypassed 3 safety systems and was pushing the fusion core far beyond its normal limits. The core glowed white-hot, feeding massive amounts of power to the ship's engines and weapons. It was dangerous, possibly fatal, but knew they needed every advantage. Captain, we have a problem. His voice came through the communication system. I've modified the core to give us 40% more power, but we can only maintain this for about 12 hours before the whole thing melts down. Understood, replied. Give me everything you have for as long as you can. You got it, Captain. Engineering out. The indomitable Will entered the asteroid field with enemy ships close behind. The vessels spread out, moving to surround their prey once again. Overlord watched from his flagship, certain that the human ship was finished. But was not running. He was leading them into a trap. Now helm, full stop. Target the 2 largest asteroids at coordinates marked Delta 5 and Delta 8. Full power to forward batteries. The ship came to a sudden stop, spinning in place. The ships, moving at high speed, suddenly found themselves rushing past their target. Before they could adjust, the indomitable Will fired both main at full power. The round struck the 2 massive asteroids, shattering them into thousands of pieces. The debris field exploded outward in all directions, catching the enemy ships by surprise. Chunks of rock moving at incredible speed tore through hulls and shields. Vessels collided with each other as they tried to avoid the debris storm. Energy discharges cascaded through their formation as damaged ships lost power control. "Target their ammunition ships," shouted, identifying 3 supply vessels in the chaos. "All weapons focus fire." Missiles and energy beams lanced out from the indomitable will. The first ammunition ship exploded in a ball of orange flame, the secondary explosion destroying 2 nearby warships. The second ammunition ship tried to flee but was caught by fire. When it exploded, 4 more enemy vessels were caught in the blast. Ensign was monitoring enemy communications, her translation software working overtime. "Captain, their communications are in chaos. They're accusing each other of incompetence. Some ships are requesting permission to withdraw." "Good," said. "Fear is our best weapon right now." The indomitable will did not wait for the enemy to recover. It accelerated again, diving deeper into the asteroid field where its smaller size gave it an advantage. The ships followed, but now they were cautious, afraid of another trap. But fear made them predictable, had identified this weakness and exploited it ruthlessly. Every time the enemy ships formed up to attack, she found a way to break their formation. Sometimes it was debris. Sometimes it was concentrated fire on their weakest vessels. Always it was unexpected. Hours passed. The battle became a deadly dance through the rocks and darkness. The indomitable will was everywhere and nowhere, striking and disappearing, refusing to fight the way the enemy expected. In medical, Dr. Jin worked without stopping. The wounded kept coming. Burns, broken bones, radiation exposure, decompression injuries. She moved from patient to patient, her hands steady despite the exhaustion. When a young ensign died on her table, she took only a moment to close his eyes before moving to the next patient. She would mourn later. Right now, the living needed her. Sergeant Sung and his Marines prepared for the worst. Boarding teams were legendary for their brutality. If any enemy commandos made it onto the ship, it would be his job to stop them. He checked his rifle for the 10th time and waited. The fight continued. The indomitable will took hit after hit. Hull breaches appeared on multiple decks. Power conduits failed. Life support became intermittent in some sections, but still the ship fought on, and still the enemy died. Rerouted power constantly, stealing energy from non-essential systems to keep weapons and shields online. When the port stabilizer failed, he bypassed it using spare parts from the backup system. When a coolant line ruptured, he patched it with emergency sealant and hope. The ship was dying slowly, but he kept it alive through sheer willpower and engineering skill. After 8 hours of continuous combat, called for a status report. The numbers were grim. 67 crew members were dead. 112 were wounded. The ship was at 34% structural integrity. They had maybe 4 hours of enhanced power remaining before the fusion core became unstable. But the enemy had lost 143 ships, nearly half their fleet destroyed by a single human vessel. Studied the tactical display, her face pale with exhaustion. "Captain, they're pulling back, regrouping at the edge of the asteroid field." Nodded slowly. "They are learning to be afraid. That will make them more dangerous." "Or more cautious," suggested. "With it is the same thing," replied. He stood up, his legs unsteady. "Take the ship behind that large asteroid. Shut down all non-essential systems. Let the crew rest for a few hours. We will need our strength for what comes next." As the indomitable will limped into hiding, the surviving ships formed a tight defensive formation. On his flagship, Overlord stared at the tactical display in disbelief. His fleet had been cut nearly in half by one ship. One old, outdated human destroyer with a skeleton crew. He sent a message to his superiors, requesting reinforcements. The reply came back quickly. There were no reinforcements. He had been given 300 ships to crush one human vessel and terrify the enemy. Instead, he had been humiliated. If he returned without victory, his life would be forfeit. The Overlord's red eyes glowed with rage. He issued new orders: no more caution, no more tactics. They would hunt down the human ship and destroy it no matter the cost. The humans would die, and they would die screaming. Inside the indomitable will, the crew shared their last rations. They knew more fighting was coming. They knew many more would die. But they also knew they had done something incredible. They had made an empire fear them. Captain walked through the ship, checking on his crew. He stopped at medical to honor the dead. He visited engineering to thank for his miracles. He spoke to the Marines, to the pilots, to every section. These were his people, and he would lead them to the end, whatever that end might be. When he returned to the bridge, was waiting with a grim expression. "They're coming, Captain. All of them. 157 ships in a wall formation, sweeping the asteroid field sector by sector." Sat down heavily in his chair. He was so tired, but there was no rest yet. "Then we give them one more surprise," he said quietly. "Plot a course to the gas giant. It is time to finish this." The indomitable will moved through space like a wounded animal, trailing vapor and debris. Inside the ship, the air was thick with smoke and the smell of burnt plastic. The environmental systems were failing, and the temperature swung between freezing cold and uncomfortable heat, depending on which section you were in. Captain had not slept in 20 hours. His eyes were red and his movements slow, but his mind remained sharp. He studied the star charts displayed on his console, planning their next move. The gas giant called 7 loomed ahead, a massive planet with violent storms and radiation belts that would scramble any sensor system in known space. Commander limped onto the bridge, her left leg wrapped in medical bandaging. She had been injured when a power conduit exploded near the tactical station, but she refused to stay in medical. There was too much work to do. "Status report," said without looking up from his charts. "We are down to 134 combat-effective crew members," replied, sitting carefully in her chair. "We have lost another 7 in the last hour from wounds. The ship's structural integrity is at 28%. Lieutenant says we have maybe 6 hours before the fusion core becomes critical." Nodded slowly. 6 hours, not much time to win a war. "And the enemy?" 137 ships remaining, all converging on our position. They have given up on clever tactics. They are just going to hammer us with everything they have until we stop moving. "Then we will not let them catch us," said. "Helm, take us towards 7, maximum speed." The helmsman looked back, confused. "Sir, that gas giant storms will tear us apart." "They will tear thee apart faster," replied. "Their ships rely on sophisticated sensors and computer-controlled shields. Our ship uses older, simpler technology. It will give us an edge." Understood immediately. It was insane, but it might work. The ships were more advanced, more powerful, but they were also more complicated. The indomitable will was old and simple. Sometimes simple was better. "We need to make them follow us," said. "If they stay outside the storms, this will not work." Smiled without humor. "Send a transmission to the enemy fleet. Tell them we are damaged and attempting to escape. Tell them if they want us, now is the time." Ensign sent the message. The response came back quickly from Overlord. It was filled with rage and promises of suffering. The entire fleet changed course, pursuing the human ship at maximum speed. The Overlord wanted revenge more than he wanted victory. That was his weakness. In engineering, Lieutenant was living inside the fusion reactor chamber, monitoring every fluctuation and making constant adjustments. The core was beyond red line, operating at levels that should have caused a meltdown hours ago, but had learned every quirk and weakness of this old reactor over years of service. He knew exactly how far he could push it. "Just hold together a little longer," he whispered to the machines, patting the reactor housing like it was a living thing. "Just a few more hours and we can all rest." The ship shuddered as enemy fire struck the rear shields. The shields held barely, but power fluctuated throughout the vessel. Lights dimmed and came back on. Life support stuttered and restarted. Dr. Jin was beyond exhaustion. She had been operating for 20 straight hours, moving from one emergency to the next. Her medical bay was full of wounded, lying on every available surface. Some were stable, others were dying slowly. She did what she could, but there were not enough hands, not enough supplies, not enough time. A young Marine, barely 19 years old, grabbed her hand as she passed. "Doc, are we winning?" Jin looked at the boy's face. He had burns across half his body and would probably not survive the next few hours, but she smiled at him anyway. "Yes," she lied gently, "we are winning." The boy smiled and closed his eyes. Jin moved to the next patient, blinking back tears she could not afford to shed. Sergeant Sung stood in the corridor outside medical, his rifle ready. Enemy boarding teams had tried twice more to breach the hull. Both times his Marines had stopped them, but the cost was high. He now had only 14 Marines left alive and combat-ready, but they would fight to the last. The Indomitable Will entered the outer edge of Seven's atmosphere. The ship began to shake violently as thick gases battered against the hull. Lightning arced across bright enough to make everyone squint. Radiation levels spiked, and alarms blared throughout the vessel. "All hands secure for extreme turbulence," ordered calmly. He gripped his chair as the ship bucked and rolled. The fleet followed them in, confident in their superior technology. Their shields were stronger, their hulls thicker, their sensors better. But as they entered the storm layer, everything changed. The electromagnetic storms hit the ships like a hammer. Their sophisticated sensor arrays went blind, showing nothing but static. Their computer-guided shields flickered and failed as the systems could not compensate for the rapid changes in energy levels. Ships lost formation, drifting blindly in the thick atmosphere. The Indomitable Will, with its old manual controls and simple systems, pushed forward through the storm. Ensign was calculating their position by hand, using ancient navigation techniques because the computers were useless. The helmsman flew by instinct and experience, feeling the ship rather than relying on instruments. "Enemy ships are scattered," reported, using passive sensors that could still function in the chaos. "They are blind and confused. Now is our chance." "All weapons free," commanded. "Target anything that moves." The old destroyer unleashed everything it had left. Missiles streaked through the storm, guided by manual calculations. Rounds tore through enemy shields that flickered in and out of existence. Energy weapons, normally visible as bright beams, were scattered by the atmosphere into deadly spreading cones of destruction. Ships exploded in the storm. Some collided with each other, unable to see their own fleet mates. Others were crushed by atmospheric pressure when their shields failed completely. Still others simply vanished into the depths of the gas giant, never to be seen again. The battle was chaos. The Indomitable Will weaved through the storm like a dancer, striking and disappearing, impossible to track or target. Had spent 30 years learning to fight with inferior equipment against superior enemies. This was what he had trained for his entire life. Lieutenant watched his instruments with growing alarm. The fusion core was entering cascade failure. They had minutes, not hours. He opened a channel to the bridge. "Captain, the core is going critical. We need to get out of this atmosphere in the next 10 minutes or we will explode." "Understood," replied. "Prepare emergency shutdown procedures." Nodded, though the captain could not see him. There were no emergency shutdown procedures that would work at this power level. If they shut down now, they would fall into the gas giant and be crushed. They had to keep running until the very end. The Indomitable Will climb toward the upper atmosphere, still fighting, still killing enemy ships. Behind them, the fleet was in ruins. Of the 137 ships that had entered the storm, only 31 emerged. The rest were destroyed, lost, or disabled somewhere in the depths of Seven. As they broke free of the atmosphere, every system on the ship began failing at once. The fusion core was screaming its warnings. The hull was cracking under stress. Life support was offline in 6 sections, but they had survived, and behind them the enemy fleet was broken. Overlord's flagship did not emerge from the storm. The alien commander who had been so confident, so certain of victory, died somewhere in the gas giant's depths, his last thoughts filled with disbelief at how his massive fleet had been destroyed by one human ship. On the bridge of the indomitable will allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. They had done it. Against impossible odds, they had won. Then he looked at his instruments and saw the fusion core readings, and he knew their victory would be short-lived. The 31 surviving ships were regrouping, preparing to run, but knew he could not let them escape. If even one ship made it back to the Dominion with news of what happened here, the enemy would return with 1,000 ships. The mission was not complete. "Pursuit course," ordered quietly. "We finish this fight." The surviving ships were running. Their formation was broken, their leadership dead, and their confidence shattered. They had come with 300 warships to destroy one human vessel. Now only 31 remained, and all they wanted was to escape and report what had happened. Captain watched them flee on his tactical display. The screen flickered and died, then came back to life with half the data missing. The indomitable will was dying. Every system was failing one by one. The air smelled like burned wires and coolant fluid. Sparks fell from overhead panels. The deck plates were hot under their feet. "Captain, we should let them go," Commander said, her voice hoarse. She was covered in soot and blood, barely able to stand. "We have done enough, more than enough. The crew needs to evacuate while we still can." Shook his head slowly. "If even one ship escapes, they will tell the Dominion what happened here. The enemy will return with overwhelming force. Earth will face 1,000 ships instead of 300. We must finish this." "Sir, the fusion core," Lieutenant's voice came through the damaged speakers. "We have 47 minutes before it explodes, maybe less. We need to abandon ship now." The bridge fell silent. Every person there knew what the captain was saying. To hunt down the fleeing enemy would take time they did not have. They would destroy the last ships, but the indomitable will would explode before they could evacuate. It was a suicide mission. Stood up from his chair with effort. Everything hurt. He was so tired. But he looked at his crew, at these young people who had followed him into hell without question, and he knew he could not order them to die. "I am putting this to a vote," he said clearly. "We can evacuate now and let some enemy ships escape, or we can finish the fight and accept that we will not survive. I will follow the crew's decision." Stared at him. A vote was completely against military regulations, but they were far beyond regulations now. Ensign spoke first, her young voice steady. "I vote we finish it. My brother died on a colony world the destroyed. No one escapes." The helmsman nodded. "Finish it." One by one, every person on the bridge voted the same. Through the ship's communication system, the votes came in from engineering, from medical, from the marine detachment. Not a single person voted to run. Felt something break inside his chest, but it was not pain. It was pride. These were his people, his crew, and they had chosen to stand together until the end. "Then we finish it," he said simply. "Helm, pursuit course, maximum speed." The indomitable will turned and began chasing the fleeing enemy. The old engines roared one last time, pushing the dying ship forward. Alarms blared throughout the vessel, warning that catastrophic failure was imminent. No one paid attention to them anymore. In engineering, Lieutenant was manually controlling the fusion core, adjusting flows and balancing reactions by hand because the automated systems had failed. Sweat poured down his face from the heat radiating from the reactor. He could feel the building energy, like a caged animal trying to break free. But he kept it controlled, kept it feeding power to the engines and weapons, giving the ship every last bit of strength it had. Dr. Jin abandoned medical bay. There was nothing more she could do for the wounded. Instead, she made her way to a weapons station and strapped herself in. Her hands, trained for surgery, found the firing controls surprisingly familiar. She had entered this battle as a healer. She would end it as a warrior. Sergeant Sung and his Marines took over the manual weapons loading stations. With automated systems failing, someone needed to physically load the missiles and rounds. It was hard, dangerous work, but the Marines did it without complaint. They hauled heavy ammunition through damaged corridors, loaded it into firing chambers, and prepared for the final shots. The Indomitable will caught up to the fleeing ships. The enemy tried to scatter, but they were too slow and too frightened. They had been beaten by a ship they should have destroyed easily, and they no longer believed in their own strength. Coordinated the attack with cold precision. She identified each target, assigned weapons to engage them, and directed the ship's movements like a conductor leading an orchestra. Her tactical genius, born from years of study and sharpened by hours of combat, was now at its peak. First target coordinates marked, all forward batteries fire. The Indomitable will shuddered as fired. The shots were perfect, tearing through the rear shields of a cruiser. The enemy ship tried to maneuver, but Ensign had already calculated where it would go. A second volley of missiles streaked forward, striking exactly where the cruiser would be. The ship exploded in silence. One down, 30 to go. The human ship pressed forward. Every shot counted now. They had limited ammunition and no time for mistakes, but the crew was working as one perfect machine, each person knowing exactly what to do without being told. This was what came from years of training and weeks of combat. They had become something greater than the sum of their parts. Dr. Jin fired her weapons station, sending energy beams into an enemy destroyer. She felt no satisfaction, no joy, only grim determination. Beside her, a young crewman loaded the next power cell with shaking hands. She gave him an encouraging nod, and he smiled weakly back. Down in the loading bay, Sergeant Sung and his Marines were working beyond exhaustion. The heat was incredible, and the explosives they were handling would kill them all if mishandled. But they moved with practiced efficiency, loading, firing, loading again. When one Marine collapsed from heat exhaustion, another immediately took his place. Lieutenant watched the fusion core with horrified fascination. The reaction mass was glowing white-hot, pushing against containment fields that were failing by the second. He could shut it down right now, maybe buy them a few extra minutes. But that would mean stopping the engines, ending the pursuit. He thought about the vote, about the crew choosing to finish the mission even though it meant death. He adjusted another control, feeding more power to the weapons. "You want to go out fighting," he whispered to the reactor. "Then let's go out fighting." The battle continued for 35 agonizing minutes. One by one, the ships died. They tried to fight back, but their morale was broken. Some ships simply stopped and waited to be destroyed rather than continuing to run. Others made desperate final stands that accomplished nothing. The Indomitable will moved through them like death itself, unstoppable and inevitable. With 15 enemy ships remaining, a transmission came through. The High Command was suing for peace. They had watched the battle through censored drones and could not comprehend what they had seen. One ship, one crew, had destroyed nearly 300 vessels. If this was what one human ship could do, what would their full fleet accomplish? The Dominion, an empire that had conquered 100 worlds, was offering to surrender. Listened to the transmission in silence. Then he opened a channel that broadcast on all frequencies, ensuring everyone could hear his response. "I am captain of the human vessel Indomitable Will. You came to our space with 300 warships to destroy us and terrorize our people. You thought we would surrender because you have never met an enemy who would not. But we are humanity. We do not know how to surrender. We do not know how to quit. You wanted a demonstration of human strength. Consider it given. Remember this day. Remember that when you attack humans, when you threaten our homes and our families, we will fight with everything we have until there is nothing left to fight with. And we will never, ever stop." He closed the channel and turned to, "How many remain?" 15 ships, sir. They are scattering in all directions. Hunt them all down. No survivors. No witnesses except the ones we want to survive. The Indomitable will pursue the last enemy ships with relentless determination. The crew worked in near darkness as lights failed. They breathed recycled air that tasted like metal. The deck shook continuously as the ship tore itself apart from the inside. But they did not stop. 12 ships, 10 ships, 853. Lieutenant's voice came over the speakers one last time. "Captain, this is it. Fusion core containment failure in 3 minutes. I can hold it that long, but not 1 second more. Whatever you are going to do, do it now." "Understood, Lieutenant. You have done well. You have all done well." 2 ships remained. The Indomitable will destroy them both with the last of its missiles. 1 ship left. It was faster than the others, pulling away, but had one final trick. She routed all remaining power from the failing shields directly to the one shot, one chance. Fire! The round crossed the distance in a heartbeat and struck the fleeing ship directly in its reactor. The ship vanished in a flash of light. "All enemy ships destroyed," reported softly. "Mission accomplished." Nodded. "Lieutenant, begin evacuation procedures. All hands to escape pods. This is a direct order." Throughout the ship, escape pods began launching. The crew moved with practiced efficiency, helping the wounded, making sure no one was left behind. Sergeant Sung physically carried 2 injured Marines to a pod. Dr. Jin refused to leave until she had accounted for every single wounded person in medical. In engineering, Lieutenant stood alone with the glowing fusion core. He could leave now, make it to a pod in time. But if he left, the core might explode early, killing everyone still evacuating. He looked at the controls one last time and made his decision. He would hold the core stable as long as possible, giving his crew mates every second he could. Commander tried to stay on the bridge to the end, but Sergeant Sung arrived with 4 Marines and physically dragged her to an escape pod. She fought and cursed, but they sealed her inside and launched it anyway. Captain sat in his command chair watching his crew escape. When the last pod launched, he allowed himself a small smile. They had done it. Against all odds, they had won. A transmission came through. Human battleships finally arrived after learning of the battle. They were close enough to recover the escape pods. His crew would live. "This is Captain. All pods are away. The ship is lost. Tell my crew they were the finest people I ever served with." The Indomitable will exploded in a flash of white light visible for light years. When the light faded, there was nothing left but debris and the memory of what had happened here. But every escape pod was recovered. 134 souls survived to tell the story of how one ship finished the fight and changed the course of the war. The escape pod spun slowly through space, its emergency beacon pulsing steadily. Inside, Captain floated in zero gravity, looking out the small window at the debris field that had once been his ship. The Indomitable will was gone, scattered across thousands of kilometers in tiny pieces. But the mission was complete. All 300 enemy ships were destroyed, and his crew had survived. The human battleship Valiant arrived 2 hours later, its massive bulk dwarfing the tiny escape pods floating in space. One by one, the pods were recovered and brought into the hangar bay. Medical teams rushed to help the wounded. Officers took reports from the survivors, trying to piece together what had happened. Commander was the first to find after they docked. Her leg was freshly bandaged, and she walked with a cane, but she moved quickly through the corridors of the Valiant until she reached the recovery room where he was being checked by doctors. "Captain," she said, relief flooding her face. "You made it, I thought. The last transmission sounded like you were staying with the ship." "I changed my mind at the last moment," admitted. "Seemed foolish to die when the work was finished. Where are the others?" "We lost 113 crew members total," reported, her voice heavy. Lieutenant stayed in engineering to keep the reactor stable during evacuation. He saved at least 20 people with those extra minutes. Dr. Jin also stayed behind to ensure all wounded were evacuated. She made it to a pod with only seconds to spare. Closed his eyes. He had known the engineer for 15 years, a brilliant man who could make miracles happen with broken equipment and spare parts. Gone now, but his sacrifice had saved lives. And Jin had almost joined him, choosing duty over survival until the very last moment. And the wounded? Asked. Stable, most of them. The Valiant has proper medical facilities. Everyone who made it off the ship will survive. Paused. We did it, sir. Against 300 ships, we won. News of the battle spread across human space within days. The story seemed impossible. One old destroyer with a skeleton crew had destroyed an entire fleet. Military analysts studied the battle records, trying to understand how it had happened. The tactics had used were discussed in every military academy. His name became known across the entire Terran Federation. The Dominion from human space immediately. Their high command could not risk another engagement like the one at 7. If one human ship could do such damage, they wanted no part of fighting humanity's full fleet. Peace negotiations began within weeks, and the war that had threatened to destroy human civilization ended with an unexpected treaty. 3 months after the battle, was summoned to Earth to testify before the Terran High Council. He stood in the massive chamber, facing the political leaders who had sent his ship to the outer edges of space as bait and forgotten about them. Captain, the council chairman began, your actions at 7 were extraordinary. You destroyed an entire enemy fleet with a single ship. You ended a war that was going badly for humanity. The council wishes to award you the Star of Valor, promote you to Admiral, and offer you command of our carrier. Stood at attention, his dress uniform crisp and perfect. The medals on his chest represented 30 years of service, but he felt nothing looking at them now. With respect, Council Chairman, I decline all awards and promotions, said clearly. The chamber fell silent. No one declined the Star of Valor. It was the highest honor the Terran Federation could give. Captain, surely you deserve recognition for your service, the chairman said, confused. My crew deserves recognition, replied firmly. The 113 men and women who died deserve recognition. The 134 who survived deserve recognition. I was simply the person who gave the orders. They were the ones who carried them out, who fought beyond exhaustion, who chose to complete the mission even when it meant certain death. He took a breath and continued. I have one request. I want a memorial built for every crew member who died on the Indomitable Will. I want their names listed, every single one, with the enlisted crew members listed first, before any officers. I want people to know that it was not one captain who won that battle. It was 247 souls working together, and 113 of them paid the ultimate price. The council conferred quietly among themselves. Finally, the chairman nodded. Your request is granted, Captain. The memorial will be built on Earth in the Hall of Heroes. Is there anything else? No, sir. I would like to return to duty. There are still ships that need captains. Captain, you are a hero. You could have any posting you want. Why return to active duty? Thought about his crew, scattered now across the fleet. Young Ensign was already being promoted and given her own tactical officer posting. Sergeant Sung was training new Marines, teaching them the lessons learned in blood and fire. The survivors were moving on, carrying the memory of what they had accomplished. Because there is still work to do, said simply. The war may be over, but humanity still needs defenders. I am not ready to stop serving. The council dismissed him with honors he did not want and respect he had not asked for, but they gave him what he truly wanted, the memorial and permission to return to space. The memorial was completed 6 months later. It stood in the Hall of Heroes on Earth, a massive wall of black stone with golden letters. At the top, it read, The crew of the indomitable will who stood against impossible odds and never surrendered. Below that, 113 names were carved in alphabetical order from Ensign Bora to Specialist. Lieutenant's name was there, along with Dr. Jin. No, wait, checked again. Dr. Jin's name was not there. She had survived making it to an escape pod at the last moment. Visited the memorial whenever he was on Earth. He would stand there for hours, reading the names, remembering faces. The young engineer who had loved old music, the medical technician who made everyone laugh, the Marine who wrote poetry in his spare time. All gone now, but never forgotten. Commander received her own command, a new destroyer named the Indomitable Spirit. She tried to get to serve as her admiral, but he refused. Instead, he took command of another old, outdated patrol ship and returned to the frontier. Some people said he was running from fame. Others said he was looking for another fight. Knew the truth. He simply felt more at home in space than anywhere else. Ensign, now commander, became famous for her tactical calculations. They called her the Ice Calculator because of her ability to remain calm and precise under fire. She never forgot the lessons learned on the indomitable will. Sergeant Sung retired from active service and opened a training facility for Marines. Every soldier who passed through his program learned about the Battle of Seven and what it meant to never surrender, no matter the odds. Dr. Jin returned to civilian practice, but she volunteered regularly with veteran support groups. She had seen too much death, treated too many wounds, but she used her experience to help others, particularly those who had survived battles but carried invisible scars. The wreckage of the indomitable will was eventually recovered from space. The largest piece of the hull, still bearing the ship's name, was placed in Earth's orbital museum. Visitors would come from across human space to see it, to touch the metal and remember what had happened there. The Dominion never attacked human space again. The battle at Seven became a legend among alien civilizations. Some species thought the story was exaggerated, impossible. Others believed it completely, having learned to never underestimate humanity's capacity for stubborn defiance. 10 years after the battle, a young cadet at the military academy approached Captain during a ceremony. The cadet had been studying the Battle of Seven and had questions about the tactics used. "Sir, I have read all the reports," the cadet said respectfully, "but I do not understand. You were outnumbered 300 to 1. You had an old ship and a skeleton crew. By every tactical analysis, you should have lost. How did you win?" Looked at the young cadet for a long moment. The question was asked often by many people. Everyone wanted to know the secret, the trick, the special tactic that had led to victory. "We won because we refused to lose," said finally. "Every person on that ship understood what was at stake. We knew we were alone. We knew reinforcements would not come. We knew we would probably die. But we also knew that every minute we fought, every enemy ship we destroyed, bought time for others to survive. We had a mission, and we chose to complete it no matter the cost." "But surely there was more to it than just determination," the cadet pressed. "There was," admitted. "We used every advantage we could find. We knew our enemy's weaknesses and exploited them. We took risks that no sane commander would take. We had brilliant people like Commander who could see patterns in chaos and Lieutenant who could make broken equipment perform miracles. We had young people like Ensign who stayed calm when everything was falling apart. We had warriors like Sergeant Sung who would fight to the last breath." He paused, remembering. "But more than anything, we had each other. Every person on that ship trusted the person next to them completely. When I gave orders, I knew they would be followed. When someone called for help, others would respond. We were not just a crew, we were family. And families do not abandon each other, even when death is certain." The cadet nodded slowly, understanding. "Thank you, sir. I hope if I am ever in such a situation, I can show half the courage your crew displayed." "You will," said with certainty. "Because you are human and that is what humans do. We fight, we endure, we protect those we love, and we never ever surrender." The ceremony continued, but thoughts were far away, in a debris field near a gas giant called Seven. He could almost hear the alarms, smell the smoke, feel the ship shaking under enemy fire. He remembered every face, every name, every sacrifice. The indomitable will was gone, broken into 1,000 pieces and scattered across the stars. But what it represented lived on. Every ship in the fleet carried a piece of its spirit. Every captain taught its lessons. Every crew member knew the story and understood what it meant to be part of something greater than themselves. Surrounded yet defiant, that was humanity's nature. When backed into a corner with no hope of survival, humans did not surrender. They fought harder, and sometimes, against all odds and all reason, they won. The story of one ship and 247 souls would be told for generations. It would inspire countless others to stand firm when facing impossible odds. It would remind humanity that surrender was never the only option, that courage could overcome numbers, and that one determined crew could change the course of history. Captain returned to his ship after the ceremony, ready for whatever came next. The frontier was vast and there was still work to do. Somewhere out there, another fight was waiting, and when it came, he would be ready. Because that was what humans did. They finished the fight no matter the cost.